Hello and welcome back to Parley, my improvisational responses to the prompts you folks submit. This one is from Just Rusty. It's about games which are meaningfully propaganda. What to do with games which are propaganda? For better or worse, I think Door Kickers 2 might be one of my favorite games of the year. I'm not familiar. It's a sort of semi-real time with the option to pause at any point. XCOM, which focuses on clearing rooms in a modern military setting. However, it is, intentionally or unintentionally, very much a piece of pro-military propaganda. I'm sort of reluctant to recommend it or even talk about it with friends, as it's so pro-Western military. While your default squad of guys are a variety of ethnicities and genders, the baddies are all very much Muslim-coded terrorists, while the countries the game takes place in and the organizations the bad guys to shoot have very much had their serial numbers filed off. There's an inescapable Americans are the goodies fighting in the Middle East vibe. The conflicts take place in Noweraki and Naboristan, names which feel almost more racist for being genericized, and the enemy groups are blackheads and insurgents. Understand, at this early juncture of the parlay, we here on this channel and my channels in general in this community are fully against that suggestion. It is not acceptable to stereotype that these whole chunks of the world are good and bad, and that is the dynamic that is going on. And I don't think that anybody with any real standards will agree with that if they think about it for long enough. It's only people that are trapped in their context, unable to gain the perspectives that make it obvious that that's bad, that would ever think that's good. That's bad. That sucks. And I can definitely relate to the feeling of being frustrated that something relatively good in some ways was made with such an obviously bad thing portrayed in it. Just getting that off the table. I'm going to read the rest of the prompt and then I've got a few sections, but I just wanted to make sure we go no further without it being clear, certainly my stance on this subject, and clearly yours as well. Even the organizations you can play as have undertones. The three options are Rangers, CIA, and Noweraki SWAT. Rangers being the default, CIA having some stealth options and small squad sizes, and the SWAT squad of non-Americans literally having a mechanic where they can bring in extra troops, as a militia is only worth half a guy. Having a faction who have a cannon fodder class feels really bad when they aren't coded as goblins, kobolds, or aliens, etc., but are in fact the only all-white faction as presented in game. Just looking for gameplay tips videos has sent my YouTube recommendations down a military spiral, recommending me an absolute slew of military history, gun nerd, military news videos. How would you, or should one even, approach discussing a game like this when there's so much baggage to sift through before the conversation can even get to the gameplay, which is actually really good and doing some very interesting things? Good question. I would like to head off a very brief unrelated thing now, which is that I have had the experience personally that if I bring up a subject like this, people can get very focused on like trying to make the problem go away for themselves. Like they'll say things like, oh, but you don't have to discuss it with other people, or you can just make it so you don't have to complain about this if you perform this action. That is not what we're trying to do here. It doesn't matter. The question is, what do we, assuming we are game designers? You don't have to be. You don't have to discuss game design, but we are going to. Some people have to. Assuming we are game designers, what shall we do when confronted with these games? We're not trying to eliminate the problem. You could. It's not complicated to do that. But we're accepting that this is an issue, and you do need to decide what to do when you discuss these games. But, like, what do you do? Sure. Yeah, I guess I have kind of two main things I want to approach. The first one is I think we have no choice but to get our hands dirty and discuss the actual problem with discussing such a game. Like, where is the actual harm done by discussing such a game? I think there is harm done, but I think it is worth looking at where that harm comes from, basically, which I think is sort of hard, but I'll try. And then a second thing, which is basically like a philosophy about game design, what good is done, obviously, I guess, by analyzing such a game. I will give a kind of short answer now, though, because I think one exists. Fortunately or not, what I said at the beginning of the video is true. People who have the perspective to understand do not think it is acceptable to paint other people this way. This means that it is very difficult to make a game that has interesting game design in it that is this propagandizing. That's hard to do. It's hard to get a group of people that have to be like aware of other perspectives enough to make interesting, good game mechanics. It's hard to be able to do that while having such a sheltered, shallow, uninformed opinion about politics, global politics, at the same time. That is difficult to do. So fortunately, you rarely need to discuss this subject in many games. I feel it is a light influence on a lot of games that mostly doesn't interfere with people's, like, people think what they think, and the game doesn't meaningfully shift their politics, and people get overly worried about, like, oh, if games are full of letting me declare what gender my character is, then somehow people think that's a bad thing for them. I would assert that for good or ill, that doesn't really happen that much most of the time. Most games don't meaningfully affect people's politics, but I think that some games do, and that matters. I believe in their ability to influence people's politics. They objectively do sometimes, for sure. And fortunately, you could take a simple line here and say, fortunately enough, you can pretty much just ignore them. It's extremely unlikely that anything you will need to learn will be only found in, like, an incredibly propagandizing game, for example. There are some grayer areas, in my opinion. I think there are games like, for example, I think Ghost of Tsushima, kind of a topic for another time, is an interesting case study here. It's a game that has been argued to be funded by, like, the military-industrial complex, or, like, a proto-nationalist people in Japan. I don't know if that's true. I don't know enough about this subject to say that. I'd want to learn about that more first. But I would say that, having experienced that game for myself, I'm not sure that it portrays things in a different enough way to the Japanophile view that a lot of the world has toward Japan. I'm not sure it portrays things in a different enough way to that view that people already have, that it actually does influence people's opinion that much. I'm not trying to be facetious when I say I'm not sure it does. I'm saying literally I'm not sure if it does. I think it is a real question whether that has that influence. Whereas this example that you've given us, Just Rusty, is explicit enough that there is no doubt that if you thought this was good, that is a harmful to the world opinion to hold. And so encouraging people to feel this way is, like, directly, immediately bad. Like, it is actively harmful right now for people to think it's good to be aggressive to an entire other region of the world. Like, that, there's no debate that that's bad. So for what it's worth, like, there is sort of a difficult layer to just don't talk about the games that are political. That does exist, but to some extent I would say the extremely explicit examples are thankfully going to tend to be few and far between, because the kind of person who will be able to make nuanced, interesting game mechanics just cannot be closed-minded enough to think these things most of the time. I think it usually happens when there's either a large team, so some people making some parts of the game can be closed-minded enough, while other people making maybe other good parts of the game are open-minded enough. And I do think it's a meaningful thought tool to say, yes, it is as simple as open-minded people are largely just nicer. And it can be, like, to an extent that simple. So that could be a simple answer, but we're not going to do a simple answer. The next level of simplifying the situation would be never talk about these games except when you can provide the full context. This is basically the position I find myself in. If you had asked this topic for, let's say that I did a service where I would do, like, a Zandypants 15-minute video essay on whatever topic you wanted, I would refuse this topic if you asked me to do that. And the reason is that I wouldn't be able to provide context, which I consider I don't think it's acceptable to discuss these games without that context. in 15 minutes. I just don't think I personally could do that, so I would just refuse to talk about it. One of the reasons that Parley is this length is because there's almost no possible topic that we can't, like, at least try to provide context for. And I'm okay with not doing an absolutely flawless historian's job of documenting the politics of a game we discuss, but I want to have the room to spend a solid 10 minutes saying that's bad and let's discuss why in some meaningful detail to make the world a more understanding place rather than a less understanding place. So you could say that's an oversimplified answer, not as oversimplified. Just don't ever discuss them except when you have the time to elaborate. If you were, for example, a YouTuber, you might want to make a series of video essays that are not 15 minutes, so that if you should want to discuss a game, that you truly believe we must discuss the game design of the game, but it requires that context, you have a format that allows that context. For just an example off the top of my head, I watched a video one time that was a really interesting breakdown of dating games, and some early dating sim video games have some incredibly problematic stuff in them, some surprisingly problematic stuff. Not what I expected, but bad. That's not good that that's in there, but not really what I expected either. It was fascinating. I highly recommend it, but look into that. The thing is though that it was like a 4 hour video or like 3.5 hours. So it was quite easy for the creator to spend as much time as they wanted, basically, giving context and air to those things. And I would argue that by doing so, we end up in a better world rather than a worse one, because we perceive dating sims as the complexity that they are, rather than an oversimplified thing. It's a quality of being in the world that we're usually forced to oversimplify. And I think a really critical turn in that thinking is to not want to simplify, to be willing to oversimplify, because we're forced to much of the time, but to resist that simplification. I don't want to oversimplify. Sometimes I'm forced to make a decision without being able to get full context. I have to be able to do that to move forward in the world, but I try not to. I'm on the side of not doing that. I don't wish to do that. It's not desirable to do that. It's good for the world to be a complicated place. It's good for me. It benefits me for the world to be complicated and not oversimplified. That is, I think, the mindset that leads to this going well, and that is why I think the video improved my tolerance of the existence of such a thing, rather than me thinking, oh yeah, and the older ones were just scummy, and people have only gotten an even remotely usable idea of dating culture such that dating sims can be non-toxic recently. That is not true. I learned from that video. That's wrong. That is the forced to be simplified opinion I had, but that is incorrect. It's interestingly incorrect. I'm happy it's incorrect. I wasn't happy that I had an oversimplified view of that. So you could go a layer further, and we'll stop. I'm going to do my 2 sections now, and say, don't bother talking to people that want the world to be a simple place. I think that's a reasonable heuristic, but that's complicated to use and a topic for another time. Just to say that I do think there are approaches, and I think thankfully you usually don't have to discuss game design when it is deeply surface level, actively problematic, because usually the thought required for there to be something meaningful to discuss about it will have required them to be aware that that was a problematic thing to do. So 2 sections now, and we're going to get back to that topic a little about like what discussing games that have a some kind of difficulty with discussing them in the final section, about the benefits of discussing these games. If you were to discuss this, why would it be worth doing that? There are some reasons, I think, unfortunately, to some extent, and so we'll discuss them. But let's talk about the actual harm, the actual factual damage on the ground of if you were to discuss these games that do this thing. I feel like pretty obviously the first thing is until you do discuss and unpack its baggage, you are essentially tacitly approving of the thing that it's spouting, right? I figure that Just Rusty I'm probably preaching to the choir about a lot of this, but I do think it's useful to do. So this will be a shorter section, but I still think it's meaningful. You know, you play the game on Twitch or whatever, and you don't explicitly say, oh, it's bad that the game has all this stuff, but I really wanted to explore this design. I am explicitly playing this so you don't have to. They make less money. You get all the value out of learning about its game design. And we all agree that it's bad to treat other people this way, and depict other people as being simply villains, where Americans, or least of all Americans, are the good guys. Um, let's say you don't do that and you just play the game on Twitch. Yeah, I mean, this is harmful. I think a lot of people don't like that, but I think it pretty clearly is harmful. You are actively creating an environment where it is safe to hate other people. That is bad. That's like creating a restaurant where you know that people like to talk some smack about other people they don't like there, and you could have done something to make them not talk about that. You put a sign on the door, ask them to stop, but the equivalent in like a stream or a video would be discuss the baggage for the game. And you don't do that. You are explicitly enabling something you could have not enabled. I feel like that is bad. It's kind of like what I'm reminded with the trolley problem. I've been in a few 101 philosophy classes, just by I didn't want to be, don't believe me. I enjoyed some of the philosophy courses I took, but not these. And these 101 philosophy courses have a lot of people in them that do not study philosophy and won't go on to. And that's okay. The result is that when we get to the trolley problem, a pretty, now I would say predictable, but I guess interesting thing happens. To recap, here's the thing that they're often being asked. A trolley is going down a track, and there are 3 people on the track. They're going to be killed if the trolley hits them. You could pull a lever to switch the trolley to a separate track, but there is one person stuck on that track. Do you pull the lever or not? Now, if you don't try to wiggle your way out of the conflict, if you pull the lever, one of the choices makes only one person die, and the other choice makes 3 people die. If you don't wiggle out of the conflict in some way, there really isn't anything to discuss. I wonder if some people would agree. The one person dying is better than the 3 people dying. If it was in a cosmic sense, remove the trolley, remove the tracks, and someone just comes down and says to you, either one person will die or 3 people will die. Would you like to pick the one person or the 3 people? I think we can agree that it would be better without any other information to pick the one person instead of the 3 people, most of the time, again, all things being equal. And the trolley problem, as I see it, is that situation, basically. But almost everyone in almost every class I've seen and discussion I've seen anywhere who discusses this insists that you cannot pull the lever and that the 3 people dying is better than the one person dying. And the reason, whether they express it or not, seems to usually be that they simply cannot accept that them not doing something counts as them being the active agent. If they didn't actively do something, if their action was the omission of doing something, they simply cannot accept that that is a bad thing that is assigned to them. Now, legally, for various reasons, maybe we wouldn't do that. But the world, the universe, reality is not a court of law. We have to decide things based on what actually happens in the real world, not based on whether we're fiscally or legally responsible for them. I mean, you don't have to decide things that way, I suppose. I'm just saying that is the thing that is being discussed. I guess that's my point. And to stamp one's foot and say, because I didn't do anything, therefore, it just doesn't have to do with me that this bad thing happened. I mean, but like, it does. It doesn't have to do with anyone else. Like, who does it have to do with instead? Again, you're not being blamed. I don't care about how you feel. We're just asking, why would it be better to do the harm instead of the less harm? And I think for a lot of people that they just won't, it's not that they disagree with that, as far as I can tell. They simply will not allow me in this example to say that. They will not they will not accept a discussion that has to do with the subject of like causality responsibility, I guess I'll call it, instead of like legal responsibility. And I guess the reason for this is that if you were to accept causality responsibility, I guess I've called it that, that'll be a useful term here, it would mean that you were implicitly doing a lot of things wrong. It would mean that life is a skill issue where you are doing a lot of things wrong for lack of doing them right, basically. I guess I'm sorry, I don't have anything else to say, but unfortunately, yes, you are. We are doing things wrong until we manage to do them right. That's okay. There are good reasons for the legal system to say you're allowed legally to do something wrong until you're able to do it right, but it is good to do it better. Like that's okay. We have a society where, well, in a lot of parts of the world anyway, not everywhere, but you can do that. But I mean, acting like it's not the case doesn't make it better. It is a bad thing because it is the lack of doing this good thing. To not say anything about the baggage of the game when discussing the game. That is an actively bad thing that someone doing that has done. I think that it is bad. I did not expect to record this parlay and be arguing why it is bad to discuss racist propaganda in a video game without unpacking the baggage. Maybe that seems unbelievably obvious to most of you, and you're thinking, wow, I didn't expect to hear an argument for that today, but I think it's meaningful to do. What bad actually happens from discussing it? We pretty much all agree, people discussing here, that it isn't good to support the judgment of other people in such a way. But why? Like, what does it do that is bad? The bad thing it would do is support a world and a dynamic where it is acceptable to treat other people that way. It heavily enables that behavior. It puts people in a place where being that they do not have a lot of perspective, being that people that are hateful are consistently people who are uninformed, you are directly allowing the only way there can be a social dynamic where that behavior is acceptable and therefore grows by providing a space where it is not unpacked. If every single time any discussion that included anything was unpacked, every single time, you would not be socially allowed to have an opinion that you had not unpacked. And you might just accept that it's bad. That's okay. You can have an opinion other people don't agree with. You just can't express and impose that opinion on other people without admitting why you have it, basically. It could be a bad reason. You might admit a bad reason why you have it. But if you couldn't have an opinion without being forced to admit why you hold that opinion, you bet a lot less people would express this type of sentiment because they know they don't have a good reason to have that opinion deep down somewhere, and if you force them, apparently at several social gunpoints to do so, that would be revealed. And so I think that's what it is, to put it in so many words. You could word it many ways, but people have. The bad thing that it does to discuss these things, most primarily, is that it enables more of that behavior, more of that dismissive and racist behavior toward other people, rather than a form of discussion where you must reason through these things. If you had to reason through these things, you wouldn't be racist, period. And people might take a while to get to the end of that train of thought, but if you were forced to travel it, you would get to the train of thought. It's a trolley problem. Then you would die on the tracks because I would be driving the trolley. It was revealed that I sold out to the trolley company. The other thing, of course, is that you might be giving money or accolades to the people making the game. You might influence people to play the game, and those people might be influenced by the attitudes within. A lot of people are not particularly focused on one or the other political agenda or opinion, and so if you have them play a bunch of stuff that depicts people this way, they just kind of accumulate the passive bias that these people are good and those people are bad, and that's bad. Now, personally, I do have a lot of criticism of that way of being, that character. You can be an active agent in your life, and I think it is kind of doing something wrong to want not to be an active agent in your life. If you are actively thinking about the things you consume, there's no danger that you'll be like brainwashed into thinking that Americans are the good guys by a piece of propaganda. It's not mind control. If you think actively about it, you will, using the tools of logic and reasoning, never be fooled into thinking that it like magically is good to be this way. You might, at the absolute worst, be tangled up in a disingenuous argument if it's presented as a more reasonable argument, sure. But all you would be doing is entertaining a possibility, and that is no thought crime, provided that you remain vigilant and try to interrogate the things that you consume. But we know that on the ground, many humans don't do that, don't have the time to do that. And it's not a character flaw of theirs that they don't have the time to do that. They objectively don't have the time to do that. So while it would be better, and it is hard not to have some opinion about people, you know, not being willing to become a thoughtful and interrogating person, and such cause this to be no danger at all. We know that in practice, many people are not that way and would be not really influenced to consciously, logically hold the opinion that these things are correct, but they would behave not very thoughtfully as though they were more correct. And that is also bad. That's still bad. So sure, though that's why it's bad, I think. There are a variety of reasons, but that's, yeah. Okay, so we've arrived at kind of the crux of the issue then. Well, then why wouldn't you just never do it? If there aren't that many games that use this kind of gameplay, or are negative propaganda or problematic in some way, and therefore you probably just don't need to discuss them, you'll lose almost no game design in this case by not discussing them at all, why would you ever even consider discussing them? Basically, I think there are some decent reasons. The first one is that if you are talking to an audience that, you know, will logically think through the thing you're discussing, and you take the time to unpack the baggage so that the audience that is watching you that will not unpick the thing you're discussing is forced to see that baggage, you know, maybe put it earlier in the video, just as a thought. People often do. Then, I would argue, there is little potential harm. A lot of the time, these things are going to be covered anyway, and you've done your due diligence that anybody who will be influenced by anything, you have given them the tools to be influenced in a positive way or a neutral way. You can't just say, oh, if we talk about anything ever, we're worried people will be mind controlled into thinking it's good, even if we give them all the tools to think it through critically. At that point, nothing you could have done would have made the person not think this. I personally think that the bad, and there is some tiny amount of bad to presenting the game ever, because some people will just insist on not really taking seriously you presenting the baggage, and then we'll get like excited about the game somehow that will happen. If you show this to millions of people, some people bafflingly will be influenced to think like, oh, what a cool game, it's so great to treat people in this terrible way. Like, that's frustrating, but logically, statistically, there will be some people like that. Personally, I feel like that's not much above like statistical variance, you know, randomness. Some people are going to do a negative thing whenever you do anything to millions of people. And that's not, you don't have to not do something just because that's true, as long as you do everything in your power to negate it, which you can. You can make the video long, not discuss it when you can't give the context, then unpack the baggage, and then discuss your opinions logically and show your reasonable work. And create a safe space for other people to not be judged for something that is not their character. Your actions are the thing that matters to me. You don't get held accountable for whatever else. And as somebody who puts effort into making my stream, for example, my community on Discord and here in these videos, a place where you are able to feel comfortable that way, at least I hope so, I do feel more comfortable discussing these kinds of things when push comes to shove, because I am already willing or geared up to kind of put in the effort to get people accepted. A problem I've noticed is that people who intend to be accepting are often not armed with an argument for acceptance. They kind of see it as a good in and of itself. And when some asshole makes a snippy comment about how, you're just being a lily liver and treating everybody like a delicate little snowflake, the person wanting to create an accepting space doesn't have the existing available arguments to counter that. Now, understand, it's not a good rhetorical technique because the other person isn't listening to reasoning. It's not to convince them. but it's to enforce a space that people who are thoughtful will understand there are rules and logic here, and I don't just capitulate to anyone who's loud or wants attention. There's like standards and morals and values to this space that are there to serve the people within it, any people within it, as long as they're willing to grant the same agency to others. But we are allowed to judge racists. Like, it is okay to say it's bad to be one way, which is a way that negates other people's existence. Like, that isn't really hypocritical. That's only rhetorically, in a very pedantic way, hypocritical. That is a completely functional value for society. It's okay to say that's bad. And I feel like a lot of people are not prepared to do that. I definitely am. I'm not going to tolerate that here. Anyway, good things about discussing the thing. I don't think it's that bad that there will be some tiny negative, as long as there are some positives. That was the point I was trying to make. So what are the positives? Well, one of them would be that you can make people aware of the game's design such as they can harness it or enjoy it elsewhere. There are lots of times where the game doesn't need to be that exact game. That's not the only thing ever that's done that. Again, fortunately, because nuanced game design is a complicated activity that requires a lot of perspective to generate reliably, you'll very rarely find games that would have such a closed-minded opinion that are making like amazing strides in game design. That just, in my humble opinion, does not happen very much. Can't really happen very much. That's convenient. And maybe that will no longer be true at some point in the future, but at the moment, I think it mostly is. And so most of the time, you will find that you can get that design elsewhere. Discussing it then could either encourage other people to remake it, but without those needlessly problematic elements, or make people aware of stuff about the design so they don't have to play it. They don't have to buy it. They don't have to discuss it themselves. They kind of just move on. I think that video essays like this can be very helpful indeed to experience a thing that a lot of people really wouldn't want to experience, that it wouldn't be good for a lot of people to experience or bother taking the time to experience, but they can still kind of get what value there would be from, for example, perspective from it to some extent. Of course, the video essayist has a lot of power when they do that. They can kind of redefine a bit, decide for themselves, and paint it to an audience like this is how the thing is. But that's the consequence of that model. I do think there are a lot of benefits to like getting it out of the way in the form of a thing we can talk about, but we don't have to like embody it or go do it or whatever, pay them money, etc. So that's one thing. The second thing, I guess, is just like the good that good game design learning can do. This one is a little more complicated, though. For example, I think that the benefit of learning about even a unique piece of design is not that high, I guess. One unique piece of design. Let's just imagine that Door Kickers 2 has some really interesting design that we're momentarily omniscient and we know actually is indeed unique to this one game. Unfortunately, it has happened that somehow these incredibly close-minded ideals have been put in this game that has a very nuanced, novel, almost necessitating open-mindedness perspective on, semi-turn-based with the ability to pause at any point, semi-real-time combat, XCOM combat. It could be an accident, for example. It might just be that they just happened to combine elements in this way and it worked out and we got unlucky as humanity, and that was done in a game that has problematic propaganda. That could be why. Sometimes I think it's because the game format is like a way for the game to get attention. This is not political propaganda, but I'm reminded of Honey Pop, a notable game for me. This was recommended by the audience. It's a match 3 game, like Bejeweled or Candy Crush, You get a grid of colored thingies and you've got to, swap them to match them to, match 3, and then they explode and you get points and it falls. Those games, But Honey Pop is a like porny, kind of softcore porny dating game on the surface. But then the dates, I guess, are metaphorically represented by match 3 gameplay. That's weird. If that seems weird, you're imagining correctly. Yes, it's strange. The sex scenes are represented with match 3 gameplay. Again, if that sounds weird, you're picturing it correctly. Like, yes, that there's that on the screen and then that on the screen at the same time. Yes, you've got it right. Good job. Give your imagination a rest now. It's cursed. The match 3 gameplay is really, really imaginative game design about what you can do to make match 3 gameplay interesting and have progression, and you get different items from the different girls and giving them different gifts, and they'll give you a little power-up item you can equip in your little inventory, and I guess these are items that you like bring or give them on the date. Yeah, it's like gifts and stuff or things you bring on the date, perfumes or gifts for them that you're giving them during the date that have power-up abilities that make a certain type of color spawn more often, or you get more points for this color, or you know, this type of match 3 thing, which increases your score multiplier. So it's kind of better in the early game to build up your score multiplier, and then you match a bunch of stuff for points with a higher score multiplier. You get more of that, maybe, or maybe you only get more of that, but you get a ton more of that, but only in the late game. So you don't have that much time to use it, stuff like that. Very interesting. There's this whole thing you can do where you make like a ramp build, where you kind of build up your multiplier a lot, and then you do a bunch of matches in one fell swoop to get a ton of points. There's this really interesting thing where it doesn't matter. It's got very interesting ideas for what that kind of gameplay could be like. Very stagnant genre that a lot of people enjoy. Lots of incredibly immediately valuable. Lots of people could enjoy these pieces of design, but they're trapped up in a like thoroughly mediocre and also a little bit problematic. For example, you can increase the multiplier of points you get on the date with the girl by getting her drunk before the date. That's bad, for reasons I don't actually feel need to be explained in this case. It's not as bad as military propaganda, in my opinion. I feel like more people can notice that that's bad. But it is presented as good. It's not presented in a parodic way. It's presented as like that's a good, normal thing to do to get laid, which is what you should focus on when you interact with women. That's very bad. That is a very trivializing view of half of our human population. That's bad. That's not good. And the result is a game that has a lot of interesting design that could be very immediately, easily useful in a very wide variety of like types of game design, but which is trapped up in a game that's like just boring for one thing, except for the match 3 gameplay, but then also like problematic, not good, you know, has messages that are negative. It might not be that big of a deal. Again, I feel like the bar is lower here. It's easier to find people for whom that would not it wouldn't meaningfully make them a worse person or behave in a worse way. We kind of know that's bad, or it would only influence people that already have basically no standards and again basically can't be interacted with. But still, I can't help but feel like I'm probably not going to put that game in any of my videos because I just don't think it's necessary. I feel like, more to the point, I can probably make a game that uses all of that design, that uses that goodness, and then just show you that. And then you gained essentially everything there was to gain from playing the game, and I basically just deleted it from history. Again, this is where it gets a little weird, because I'm not sure that's entirely good. I feel like it is not bad for people to kind of know that that's happening. Like, there's lessons to learn from Honey Pop. It's worth learning that these games that are deeply insensitive sometimes have surprisingly involved game mechanics. That tells us something about psychology, that my claim that people who don't have an open-minded perspective generally won't come up with good game design ideas, that is only mostly true. That's not entirely true. That isn't a heinous oversimplification, in my opinion, but it is an oversimplification, unfortunately. It says something about judging a book for its cover. I had an audience member who objected to us discussing it, and I said, I will use whatever I can to do good game design, and that's only going to make those game design ideas better by putting them in a context that isn't disrespectful of other people in our society. I think that's good. If you are a person who is armed with the logic to think this through and not be hateful to your fellow people, I mean, there's no negative. Let's look at it in another way. Is there anything wrong with just Rusty having played Door Kickers 2? if they will acknowledge all of its negative baggage and military propagandizing? No, as far as I can tell. It's not magic. It's bad. It's unambiguously not good, but it's bad for reasons. It's not, there's no sorcery. It does a bad thing reliably, and you could more or less inure or inoculate yourself to that badness. That doesn't mean it's good to be arrogant. We can all be influenced by things. But I do think it is necessary in discussing this subject to say what is the reasonable extent to which we say you can deal with this content. You can be exposed to this, and that's okay, and it's not harmful enough that we need to avoid it to be exposed to this. I don't think that trigger warnings are a bad thing to do. I think that's a good, reasonable thing to do that has no real drawbacks. I think is the biggest reason why I don't see why you would try hard to resist that. But another way to look at the issue is you as an individual, if something bothers you, it's only for you to decide how do you want to expose yourself to this or not, right? I mean, you might decide it would be more helpful for you to be exposed to it in a controlled setting. That's a common therapeutic technique, for example. And it's also a common approach to vehemently avoid it. And I think there is an argument for both or even a mix of behaviors throughout one's life. I don't know, it's your business if something is bothering you. That's just my thoughts for my own struggles. And I think that the way that's useful here is to say that there is something that can be valuable about being unrestrained as long as you are willing to go in with a system that will result in respecting other people. It's not then bad along the way to, when it is truly in the privacy of your own mind, experience things that would be negative otherwise and would have negative influence on other people. To put it a different way, it's possible to experience these games in a way that legitimately doesn't ever inform anybody else that you are experiencing it. And therefore, if you have the ability to grapple with the subject, there's certainly no negative, really, except maybe you wasting your time with it if it's a vapid game that espouses ideals that you've already dismantled. But I mean, if there's interesting game design in there, that is great. And I just think people, while respecting that these things can be problematic, might consider that it would be worth breaking down why they're problematic, like what harm is done. I don't think it's good to even necessarily be directly accepting of other people with a total lack of care toward understanding, I guess is my shtick. I don't think that is ultimately a very good solution or any solution at all. And I think that real understanding is the proper way forward. That is the tool that solves the problem at its core. So I don't know. That's my answer. I hope I spent enough time talking about maybe what you would do to tackle such a thing. I will just add that I think when I said unpack the baggage and then address the thing, I think it's worth really unpacking the baggage. Like for some people, it may be that there's kind of like a subtle thing the game does to influence you to think these people are good, these people are bad. I think it's worth going into a little bit of detail about that. I think that people sometimes, probably not intentionally, when they address something that is maybe bad or problematic in a game, gloss over it to a degree that the people that need to hear this kind of don't know what they mean, or like assume they know what they mean, and don't realize it is kind of problematic in this specific way, and that is a subtly judgmental way to paint these people in a way that maybe some of those people would have overlooked. I think it is worth going into some detail. Again, I'm talking about a longer video. I'm saying you would spend a good 10 minutes, giving a specific example of the things in the game that actively trivialize other people for an unjustified reason. I feel like that slightly completes the sentiment I was providing. Does that make sense? So I don't know. I think I have mostly uncomplicated thoughts about this subject, but also, again, because video games are a complicated type of production, yeah, unfortunately, it is not completely true that you can just totally ignore. Well, you can totally ignore them, but that you lose nothing by totally ignoring, the problematic games in the world. I think there are some things to gain from those things, and I would argue this is a rare case where I'm going to say this is the trade of the video essayist to an extent. Doesn't mean everybody writing video essays needs to do it. I hope it doesn't upset you that I have very few plans to do so, though you could argue this is me doing it here, but this is different than a video essay, sort of. Or the podcaster, I guess. And that it is probably a bad idea almost every other place I can think of. Like, there aren't very many other forums where it would not do meaningful harm to discuss such a thing, other than a long form video essay or discussion. I'm not sure you need to. You know, a philosophy that I have brought up about discussing things before is not only do people often get put into situations where they oversimplify, and that is bad, and that the ideal is to not need to oversimplify, but that you as an individual can do something further. You can purposefully, deliberately avoid situations where you would need to oversimplify. Much of the time, when confronted with a conversation where you would need to oversimplify such an opinion, upon inspection, you can simply not have that conversation and avoid situations where you need to oversimplify. If you oversimplify often enough, you change your views, and you might not want to do that. If you're asked often enough to express your opinion in a way where you don't get time to explain it fully, that changes your opinion, usually for the worse, because it contains less detail than it did before, and it's worth putting energy into avoiding doing that, in my opinion. That might seem odd to some people, but I don't really think it is. I feel like people are a little too eager to do things that do oversimplify. I'm reminded of something like Twitter's character limit, for example. People do often post the chain tweets. But I've had people over the years be very resistant to the idea that Twitter's structure like has you oversimplifying things. Like, it's okay if it does, and you're not evil for using it just because it does do that, but that is what the structure rewards. Like, that it's not meant for anything else. There are ways around it, because of course people are going to find ways around it, because this isn't a smart conclusion. This is an obvious thing that lots of people know already. And so smart people on Twitter are trying to find ways to actually express their actual opinion. So of course there are ways, people that work around it, but it has a big effect on communication on that and many other social media platforms. It's sort of surprising to me that that was ever a controversial subject, but I have experienced that it is. And I think it is possible to live your life in such a way where you're a fully functional member of normal society, but you simply delete all of the situations where you would need to trivialize your own views. This causes you to have less trivialized views. If you're only ever prompted to think about what you think in a forum where you have time to think about what you think and will get some back and forth in discussion about what you think, you will end up having better thoughts. You will be a nicer and more informed person as a result. And I don't think it's bad to have a model of improving the self where we engineer an environment where it would be reasonable to produce a thoughtful person, as well as deliberately trying to be thoughtful and not judge others for heinous, unrelated qualities they have. Thanks to the parlay. If you want to submit your own parlay, it can be like this one. Something I always say here is that the reason people ban politics is because they don't have the time to get into it. In a way, that's a good rule for Twitch or a lot of people's YouTube channels, but we are going to get into it here. I don't monetize these videos. You can discuss these things if you want to, though I suspect that a lot of people won't. People who are willing to take the time to get into it like this probably won't want to, for them, rehash politics they're already exhausted by. But I welcome this type of subject. This is a good place for it. And any other type of subject that you're interested in. I hope I tackled this in a useful way and managed to express that I wanted to welcome everybody so long as they are willing to welcome everybody else to the community that we share together. And if I didn't come across that way, I meant to, and I'm very sorry I didn't. I had every intention of doing so. If you want to submit your own parlay like this, you can do that in the description. You can submit whatever you want. We'd love to have you. Looking forward to the next one.